Hi, this is Jonathan Prestige from Specialty Coffee Home. Today I'm going to be talking about the way that you get your espresso tasting really good. And you do this by a process called dialing in. Now dialing in is where you adjust the grind and you adjust the input dose, so how much coffee you put in, and the output dose, how much coffee you take out in the form of the espresso to get a really good tasting shot. Now we're going to try and simplify these steps a bit because often with dialing in there are so many variables that you end up chasing your tail and never getting a good coffee. So what you need basically is some coffee beans. In this case it's a Ycan, a really nice Guatemalan light roast from Kelowna Coffee. We've got our grinder and obviously our espresso machine. And the other important thing is scales. Now years ago people used to talk about this thing called the God shot, which was the one espresso every sort of 20 or 30 that you made that tasted amazing and all the others were mediocre or okay. The reason we had this thing with the God shot was that people were not weighing the coffee, they were just putting a dose in that they thought was about right, and then they were kind of judging it on the look of the output, how long it took, and they were sort of saying, well, we'll do it that way, but there's no consistency then. And when you're dialing in, consistency is a really important thing. So what they were getting the God shot because occasionally they were accidentally getting all the parameters totally correct and getting a good shot, but then they weren't able to repeat that because they weren't measuring anything. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at grind today, which is pretty much the most important thing. The finer that we grind, generally speaking, the more we get out of the coffee, so the more flavours we extract. The coarser we grind, the fewer flavours we extract. And what that means, basically, you think, well, why don't we just grind finer and finer and finer? Once you get to a certain fineness, you get a problem with undesirable flavours extracting from the coffee, so woody, smoky flavours, that kind of horrible over-extracted flavours. If you grind too coarse, what you find is you get these kind of very acidic flavours that aren't particularly pleasant either. So the thing to start with is your input dose. Now you will have a basket in your portafilter that will be a certain size, and generally speaking there'll be a plus minus 1 gram around that size. So we're using 15 gram baskets. So we're going to keep our input dose at 16 grams. We're not going to change that. If you start changing that, you start changing your extraction. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to measure out roughly 16 grams here, slightly over because the grinder has a little bit of retention. I'm going to put it into the grinder here. Then I'm going to take my measure here, which is what I use for capturing the grinds. You may use something similar with your grinder, or you may grind straight into the portafilter, but you need to weigh your grinds when they come out. So I'm going to zero the scales there, and I'm going to grind at a setting of 1.8 on this EK portafilter. Okay, so you'll find your grinder, generally home grinders will take a bit longer to grind than this, and now we're going to weigh that and check that we've got 16 grams. So we've got 16.3. I'm going to knock a little bit off there so that we're down to exactly 16. We want to keep it within 0.1 really of where we are. That's dead on 16 now. Now you'll need scales that actually measure down to 0.1 of a gram, otherwise you're not going to get much accuracy with them. If you get a gram difference in coffee is enough to make quite a big difference to your actual coffee that's coming out. So I'm just going to clean the portafilter here, making sure we don't keep it out of the machine for too long so that it doesn't cool down. And then I'm going to add my coffee in. Yeah, bit of spillage there, but not enough to affect it. What I'm doing here is I'm just distributing the grounds evenly in the portafilter, in the basket. Now a lot of people get hung up on the dose and the tamping. When you're making coffee, tamp pressure doesn't matter that much as long as you're consistent with it. So if you've got a light tamp, don't do a hard tamp the next time. Just try and keep it consistent. The actual how much you tamp doesn't really matter as long as you're doing it consistently. That's the only thing that really matters. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to extract the coffee. I'm going to look at the timer. Now, generally speaking, most coffees will not taste good if they're extracted anything less than 20 seconds. So what that means is your target weight, which I would advise you going to start with at 2 to 1. So we put 16 grams in, we're going to look for 32 grams out. If that comes out in less than 20 seconds, it's unlikely that your coffee's going to taste good. Right, so I've got 32 grams here, just over 32 grams, and what we find here is that has taken 25 seconds. Now, I know with this coffee that it's probably going to taste a little bit under extracted. It's a very light roast coffee, it's quite a high grown coffee as well. So the lighter the roast, the higher the altitude it's grown at, the harder the coffee is to extract. So what that means is that we're probably going to have to run the coffee for longer. We're going to have to grind finer. So what we're going to do, I'm going to taste this now and see what we're getting flavour wise. Okay, so there's a lot of acidity in that. It's fairly sweet because it's a very good coffee, but there's far too much acidity at the front of it. So when you're looking at under extraction, we're talking that sour taste, like that really kind of lemony, acidic taste. Think of that. That is what you don't want. So what we're going to do now is we're going to grind a couple of stages finer, and that was 25 seconds. So I think I'm going to be looking for about 30 seconds, and that is going to give me a better coffee. Now, what you'll find is you'll need to keep repeating these steps until you go to the other end. And by the other end, I mean over extraction. What's over extraction? Well, over extraction is when you grind so fine that you end up with bitter, smoky flavours. Now, people often find it difficult to differentiate between under extraction, acidity, and over extraction, which is bitterness. And I put this down partly to the use of the term bitter lemon back in the 80s to describe a drink. There was a drink called bitter lemon. I think a lot of people think that that kind of bitter lemony flavour that's described in there, which is actually a sour flavour, it's acidic flower, is bitterness. When you think of bitterness in the sense of over extraction, you've got to think of that really bitter flavour that you get with very, very dark chocolate. It's not an acidic flavour, it's a bitter flavour. And you also get smoky elements in there, you get woody elements. If you're starting to get those in your coffee, then you need to dial back a bit. But to get the best tasting coffee, you want to keep going until you get to that point where you're getting the over extraction, and then dial back from there. Because the best tasting coffee, generally speaking, is going to be at the point just before you start to get those over extracted flavours. That's where you get the most sweetness from the coffee. So, going back to what we were saying earlier, keep everything else the same. Keep your dose the same, keep your output the same. So I'm still going 16 into 32, but this time I've ground quite a bit finer. So instead of taking 25 seconds, that's taking 28 seconds. Now, because I've ground finer, I'm going to get a lot more from the coffee because the surface area presented to the water is a lot greater because there's a lot more granules there, more coffee grinds, and they're all smaller and the surface area is greater. So the water is going to extract more from the coffee. So hopefully this should give us a sweeter flavour. Let's just try that. Okay, so immediately lost some of that acidity, got a lot more sweetness, no over extracted flavours, no woody flavours, but we can go further with this coffee. So what I would do if I was dialing in this coffee now, I'd probably go a couple of steps further, taste it, a couple of steps further, then when it starts to get to that woody flavour, I dial back, all the time keeping my input dose and my output dose the same, so 16:32. So if you've got a bigger basket or a smaller basket, just use that 2:1 ratio to start with. We'll talk about how you affect things by dose and by output dose in another episode of these videos, but for the moment that's the best way that you can simply control how your espresso tastes. Cheers!